Hello. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of the Having Had podcast. My name's Brent. Just wanted to jump on today, and I'm really grateful. I've picked up quite a few followers and subscribers over the last 6 episodes, so I just wanted to jump on and introduce myself to the newcomers and kind of reintroduce myself to those of you who have been listening all along. I started in the music business as a touring guitar tech in 93. Did that for 15 years. Spent a lot of those years also working as a stage manager. I worked for a long list of bands just to hit the ones I worked with for substantial amounts of time. I started with Crowbar from New Orleans. Was lucky enough to do the first Down record and tour. Went to New York to work for Life of Agony for several years. Also worked for Typo and Anthrax out of New York. And then spent 7 years with the band Seven Dust from Georgia. Off and on over the years, did a lot of shows with Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and finished up my full-time touring career with a band called Stained from Massachusetts, taking care of Mike Mushok. Was lucky enough to do quite a few records with other artists through those 15 years and a bunch of one-offs with different bands. And then fell into the film business in 2007, first as a rigging grip and then pretty quickly thereafter as a set grip, and then a dolly grip for a couple of years. Have quite a few credits as a set electrician, and then most of the last 8 or 9 years back in the rigging side of the grip department, with several of those years as a rigging key. I've also been active in the recovery community since 1989. So the whole point in saying all this is that I'm in a unique position that I have met a ton of really interesting, really inspiring people in my life, between all the areas of my life. And, a lot of people are interested in the music, what it kind of behind the ropes in the music business or film business is like. So this is kind of a picture into that. But more importantly, hopefully in hearing me have conversation with these people that I have connected with about the things we have connected on, that maybe you'll find some inspiration in that. And, in some cases I'm going to be talking to people and already have with a couple of them that I haven't talked to in quite a while, years in some cases. And, it's like we picked up, right where we left off, like we never missed a beat. And maybe that will inspire you to pick up, the phone and reach out to somebody that you've connected with in your life in the past that maybe you've lost that connection with. I just know that I'm happier the more closely connected I am to the people in my life. So, that being said, I'm really excited about today's episode. And for the first time, it's going to be part 1 of 2. This conversation went long enough that I decided to split it into 2 episodes. Today's guest is Morton, who many of you will obviously know from the band Lamb of God that he's been with for a very long time. He's also a solo artist with an album out and now an author. His memoir called Desolation is coming out June 25th. Really fun conversation. We cover a lot of topics, and I hope you enjoy it. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe. Please like it. Mash all the buttons that help me out. And please take the time to go to Instagram and follow the Having Had podcast page there. That's where I release everything about new episodes and put up pictures that are, sometimes discussed in the episodes that you might enjoy seeing. So I really hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as we had having it. Thanks for checking this out. Enjoy. Mark Morton.
What's up?
We finally made it happen.
It took some jumping through hoops.
A couple of boomers trying to figure out technology.
We did it.
I appreciate you being here. COVID had an unexpected, pleasant impact on my life because, obviously it's a terrible thing, but it made Zoom meetings possible. And through Zoom meetings, I have met some incredible friends, and you were one of them. And so I met you right at the front end of COVID in a meeting. And I've talked in some of the other episodes quite a bit about how you have certain friendships that, you can not talk to somebody for a long time and pick up the phone and call them, and it's just like you never missed a beat. And I had this sense after hearing you talk just a couple of times and hearing you share a little bit of your story that I knew you. You know what I mean? Like you're just the same. You come from the same place I do. There was a familiarity across pretty much all areas that I clicked with. So pretty much instantly, I think. At least I felt that way. If you didn't feel that way, don't tell me. Just pretend like you did, because at least I'm convinced you did.
No,
But,
it was mutual. Like I would say, the second time you and I actually had a conversation would have felt to me like I was talking to an old friend for all those reasons that I'm sure we'll get into. But just we come from the same place, sort of
the same different place.
Yeah. I mean, we are of the same earth, I guess, and yeah.
Yeah, it was great. It's been great to get to know you even better the last few years. So what I usually do, just to kind of start off, because this is as much about people's stories and how interesting I think they are, but how and where did you grow up? What was childhood like for you?
I was born and raised in and outside of Williamsburg, Virginia, which is a pretty small, sort of historic town in southeast Virginia. I grew up in James City County, which is adjacent to Williamsburg, and I had a really pretty enjoyable, I guess, barely middle class childhood in the beginning. My dad worked in a beer can factory for 30 years. My mom was a bank teller.
Your parents were married throughout your childhood? No divorce?
No divorce. No, they. When my dad died 10 years ago, and they were married 52 years when he died. Not all of them were pretty, but they were still married. Yeah, and I mean, that's a whole crazy story. Those two, in and of itself. But yeah, I grew up there, and we rode little motorcycles in the woods and built forts and ran around through dirt clods at each other. And my dad grew a big garden. There were sunflowers everywhere. I used to pick blackberries on the edge of the woods right by the house. All that stuff, Yeah.
I mean, same for me. We moved. My parents divorced when I was 7, and we moved to Louisiana. But with my mom, that still spent summers and every chance we got up in West Virginia, where I'm from. So between West Virginia and Louisiana, I think that equals somewhere around a Virginia.
Right. Right. The sum of the two.
The sum of the two. Do you like in early childhood or whenever it was, even if it was up into your teen years, do you remember like the first thing that like truly inspired you? It could have been music or anything. Was there anything that you remember as something that lit you up early on?
Well, yeah, I mean, the obvious answer I think is music. So I have an older brother who's like 7 years older, 7.5 years older than me, something like that. And so when I was 5 or 6, he would have been 12, 13, 14, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And if I was 6 in 1978 and he was whatever, 13, 14, he's listening to Aerosmith and Van Halen and Molly Hatchet and Leonard Skinner. I don't know. I said Van Halen, but it's Van Halen. But he was listening. He was listening to all that stuff, and it's just coming out of the 8-track player in his bedroom, and I'm just soaking it all up. So I remember hearing Eddie Van Halen's Eruption and thinking it sounded like a UFO landing. I didn't even equate that was like human hands doing that on an instrument. it just sounded like um, something from outer space to me, and it was like really just kind of exploding my imagination with imagery and excitement and all that kind of stuff. So music was that. That was a big deal. And I mean, I was a pretty, into all the other stuff kids are into. I was into football and playing in the woods and all that kind of stuff. But even before I ever even considered the idea that I might possibly play music, because no one in my family was a musician, but there was music everywhere. And I really, really loved listening to music and just sort of letting my mind, it just kind of like, it just resonated in a corner of my brain that nothing else did.
Yeah. Well, did you go to any concerts young, or were you a teenager before you went to a show?
So we lived right by Williamsburg, and there's this theme park there called Busch Gardens, and there's one in Florida. It's still there. There's one in Florida because my dad works in the beer can factory. Next to the beer can factory is the beer brewery, Anheuser-Busch, and then Anheuser-Busch has Busch Gardens, which is this theme park, right? And they would have little concerts there. So I saw my mom took me to see Quarter Flash there. You remember, Quarter Flash?
I remember.
Yeah, what's the Harden My Heart? Is that Quarter Flash?
Maybe,
or is that the Motels? I think that's the one. Yeah, it's got the sax solo and stuff, yeah. And then the second one was Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, which is cool.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool. At a theme park, and I don't know, I was probably in 5th grade or something. But I didn't start going to like real concerts until 8th or 9th grade, I'd say. And again, my big brother would take me to see Van Halen and Motley Crue and White Snake and all that kind of 80s stuff. And by then I had started playing guitar a little bit, so it was hitting different.
Was it how old were you when you first got a guitar?
Almost 13.
So was it instant that you felt an ease with it? Or did it come easy to you?
I don't think it did at very first. It didn't feel like it did. Maybe zoomed out, it might have been like, wow, he's really picking that up. But at the time, it didn't. It felt like very challenging. But it felt, even before I played one, I would see pictures of an electric guitar in a magazine, and just it might as well have been glowing,
Yeah.
And I was fat kid, bad at sports, awkward, kind of. I wasn't the typical nerd bookworm, but I was just nerdy, just like that, really kind of an awkward kid and uncoordinated. All my, back then everyone was skateboarding, and I would try, and I was just terrible at it. And I played baseball, and I was the chubby kid, so they put me at catcher, and when they start winging the ball around Little League, it hurts, and I'm scared to swing at it, and just, all that just bad. And so guitar, I don't know what it was. I guess I was just so enamored with it, and I just held on to that thing so tight. Like I just never, ever, ever wanted to let it go.
Did you woodshed right out of the gate? Like just sitting in your room? Listening and figuring it out?
The second I got one. It was like, I remember the little nylon strip. The first one I got, we had this thing called the Trading Post. It was like a newspaper. This is obviously way pre-internet or anything. And you'd go buy the Trading Post and go through the classifieds, and we bought this, like, my mom bought me this $15 like little nylon string acoustic guitar.
That was my first as well.
Yeah. And I would play I remember playing Should I Stay or Should I Go? Or what I thought sounded like a ding, 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 ding. And then I'd go brick, brick, brick. And I thought I was like doing something, But yeah, it was that. And then my parents were very supportive. And I said earlier that we were like, very, very working class. And we were, but it was the 80s and I don't know if this is like getting too personal, but my mother would take all my dad's checks and bonuses and invest them. She was a financial whiz. And so in the 80s, when the stock market went crazy, all of a sudden my parents were like way more comfortable. And so we moved into the nicer neighborhood, and I could like my mom got me guitar lessons. So I have this like strange like line down the middle of my childhood where it was like we
Before
lived
and after.
we lived in the real simple like neighborhood next to the woods and all that, and then we moved to the neighborhood with the swimming pool and the neighborhood pool and the tennis courts and stuff. And I didn't know what to do there either, so I just kind of sat in my room and played guitar.
First band, high school, or
First band, like I had little buddies that I jammed with, like seventh or eighth grade, that were kids that were kind of like along the same trajectory as me with their, that friend of mine played drums and stuff. But my first actual band was a band called Axis, and it was just some kids from school, from high school, a couple of older kids, and me and this hotshot guitar player named Ryan, who taught me a lot. He was a really good friend and played circles around me, and he's still, I mean, in a lot of ways, he still does, and we're still friends. But we were playing like Crazy Train and Iron Maiden songs and stuff like that. We were pretty good. We were pretty good, actually.
any talent, like high school talent shows?
Oh,
Was
yeah.
that a thing up there?
Yeah, it was a thing. Yeah, my 10th grade year, we won it was this weird thing. It's funny you're asking me all this stuff that I just went through all this stuff because I just wrote a book, right? And
Yeah.
and the first few chapters of the book are all this stuff. So yeah, there was this local talent show called Stockwood, but it was weird because it wasn't just like limited to kids from school. It was held at the high school across town, not the one that I went to. But they would allow anybody to audition for this thing. So you had like dad bands, like dad garage bands auditioning because it was kind of a big thing. It was a little small area community or whatever, and it was like Stockwood every year was this big thing, and you would audition, and 5 or 6 bands would get it. So, we were the shaggy haired, 10th, 11th grade kids going in there playing Crazy Train, but we won it one year, and it was cool. But we were
That's
pretty
awesome.
good. We were pretty good.
My experience with it, I talked about this in another episode with my buddy Ian Keith, who's a guitar tech for everybody, and how I played 7th and 8th grade talent shows, and we played a couple of I did the Star Spangled Banner Hendrix style
That's bold.
as the intro. Well, and I told him that I was so nervous because it was in front of the whole school. We were the only band. It was all these other talent acts, and they like introduced us, and here I am. I was so nervous that my foot on the wah, I was shaking, and I kept turning my wah on and off during
like actually clicking the button, yeah.
because I couldn't control my
For those
foot.
who don't know, that takes quite a bit of pressure to click that button. You don't really do that accidentally, so that's a
was-
full-fledged
I was
shake.
terrified. We played Star Spangled Banner, and I think we did Purple Haze and Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin.
All right, that's pretty
And,
solid. Pretty solid set.
But getting back to what you're talking about, as an insecure kid, to get up there and do that, my whole life changed school-wise. There was pre that talent show and post, and I was a lot cooler after that talent show. A lot more people talked to me. You know what I mean?
So yeah, I don't know that one night had the same effect for me, but there was definitely that era where I just like right around the time of that band, and then on to the next one, where all of a sudden I went from being that really just kind of awkward kid with like I didn't have a backpack. I was one of the kids that carried around like the book bag and like on the corner of the wall, head down. You know what I mean? Just like,
Yeah.
like it was all bad. And then like within a couple years, I wasn't Mr. Popularity or anything, but everybody like I was pretty settled into an identity as that kid that plays guitar, and I was really really cool with that.
Well, I mean, for me, my active addiction started really early at like 13.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in retrospect, it would have been awesome if I could have poured that energy into guitar, taken on that identity. But I needed to change the way I felt so early on. Like I was so uncomfortable in my skin that I started picking up really early. And then, like, I remember there was a moment, my mom was out of town. I think I was 14, maybe had just turned 15, and was well into drug use. And my mom was out of town for a weekend, and I had I didn't even know some of these people. It's like 3 a.m. I think we had done acid and drunk and everything. But there was this guy from the other side of town that I knew by name only that showed up with a mutual friend. His name's Robbo, and I still know the guy. I haven't seen him in a year or two now, but he's still here in town. And he was just that kid that he sat on the cabinet on the countertop in my kitchen that night and played every song, Fade to Black, and you name it. And just effortlessly, eyes closed, in the dark, and we're all on acid, out of our minds, loaded.
That's the greatest thing you ever heard in your life.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, like any pipe dream I have of doing that, I'm so far behind that this guy's already doing this. Like, I'm not on that level at all, because I was playing, and of course I had to, I didn't grow up wanting to be a guitar tech. None of us do. We all want to be the guy we're handing the guitar to, or most of us do. I accepted, anyway, that's later in a different story. But like, I always kind of, since I've gotten to know you, I imagine that you were the Rob Owen of Williamsburg.
I wasn't. I wasn't. I was. My friend Ryan was. I was always the. That's what I tell people. Like, I wasn't even the best guitar player in my high school. Like,
Gotcha.
Like, I was the second best. To this day, if Ryan and I get together and jam, he's playing lead first. I default to rhythm, because it's just, that's where I'll warm up and grab one. You know what I mean? But it's like, let him go. Like, he's incredible and taught me so much. He later went on to play. It still does, actually. They're doing shows again. Years later, after us doing all our bands and a bunch of different bands, he plays guitar for the band Alabama Thunder Pussy, who you may have heard of. Yeah. So that's Ryan. So we grew up together, and he was as much a guitar teacher as I ever had, and just a killer player. But one thing that I did different was, and I don't know why this is, but right away I started writing songs or writing riffs, or I didn't even know what that was. I just started coming up with stuff that was my idea, and I was a busboy and working all these, crummy teenage jobs and saving all my money and buying like those 4-track cassette recorders where you could record with a track and then go on top of it and do all that stuff. And little stupid drum machine, but it kept a beat, and I would riff to that. And so I didn't even really understand it at the time, but I was making demos of songs and learning how to record in a very rudimentary way. And writing, although I wouldn't have necessarily called it that at the time. I just had an idea, but my idea was a song I was writing. And I'd write lyrics, and my buddy that was singing for the band, I'd go, I'd bark out chant out the lyric to it, and he'd put a melody to it, and we'd write songs. And that's what I was doing at 15 years old, was writing songs. And I think I always wanted to be the fastest, shreddiest guitar player, and I never really was. But looking back, I'm glad that I was learning how to write songs.
Yes.
Because that's really, more than anything now, what I focus most on musically is just trying, where's the song? Even in the context of, and I do a bunch of other stuff outside of Lamb of God, but even in the context of Lamb of God, these days it's like, okay, we'll riff it out and all that, but like, is there a song underneath all of it? Like, let's find the song. And that's, I think that for me has been a lifelong kind of quest.
So as far as the coming up, the riff writing, that's something. The riffs come easy to you, always have?
They're not always good.
Oh, no.
I tell people all the time, like, I write a lot of terrible riffs. I do my best to only let y'all hear the good ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I pick up a guitar and there's usually a riff under my fingers. I don't, it may not be a great one, but there's usually something. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there a moment at any point, through all of that, or, even earlier, that you knew this is what you were going to do? Like, this was going to be your main goal or your track in life?
No.
Like, because I want to get into, I know you moved to Richmond to go to school,
Yeah.
and that track, and where your head was with all that, with your major, but
Yeah, so I think I was told correctly all along, mostly by my parents and my dad specifically, who was an awesome dude, but he was a very protective and realistic dude. And he grew up, he didn't have plumbing, when he was a
Yeah.
kid. You know what I mean?
Dude,
And
same. My dad was
yeah,
the same.
I mean, it's like so in his world, he went from a kid running around like using the
Outhouse.
an outhouse in the woods to now he's worked his ass off and gone up into management at the beer factory, and he's got a chance to put his kids into college. That's never happened in our family tree. You know what I mean? And so he was like, "It's great that you play guitar. I can tell you're good." But you need to have an idea about what you're going to do to make a living. You know what I mean? And he was right, my point is that I think I heard that so much that I believed that, and turns out he was right. But I also knew I was a guitar player. I was never going to stop playing no matter what. I never ever made any deliberate moves that I thought were going to wind up with me playing music professionally as an ongoing career.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything to not do that, but I just never believed it. And if for your listeners, viewers who aren't familiar with Lamb of God, which is my primary band, we couldn't have scripted a band less likely to be commercially successful
Viable.
if we had tried. We could not have made it less likely if we had tried. I mean, but somehow the world, as it does, sort of shifted around and kind of came to us, and we were there at the right time, floating on the board, waiting for a wave that we didn't think was ever going to come, and it came.
Yeah. So when you went to Richmond to go to school, your major was...
Well, it started out as mass communications,
Gotcha.
and the thinking there was I was going to go into like radio and TV production, because in my mind, that was the closest thing that I could do that was, a sort of, realistic career path that still somehow involved music.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I'll work at a TV station or a radio station or something. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
And it would be. But then as I started taking all the courses, and I had noticed this in high school too, like I was really into political science courses. Like in high school, I really liked my government class. And then so I got to college and I was really into the government classes, and I found myself second year just taking those as electives that I could have taken any number of things, and I was taking these government courses, and then I was like, well, maybe I'll major in political science. That'll be about as useful as a degree in music would have been.
Exactly. And your minor was in African American studies?
My minor. I had two minors. So I ended up with a bachelor's degree in political science with minors in international studies and African American studies, which again were sort of accidental. I was just taking classes that I was really fascinated by.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by all of these. So this was the 90s. This was the early 90s. And for those of your listeners who weren't around or conscious or alive in the early 90s, there was this sort of spirit of Generation X feeling like we're going to make a difference. The world's going to be different. It was, Bill Clinton with his saxophone and Nirvana, and all that, and Lollapalooza and grunge and it was, when you say social justice now, in a lot of circles it has a negative connotation, and I understand that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like in the 90s, it was like this feeling that we were like things were gonna be different now, and now that we're getting the wheel, it's gonna be nothing wound up different, right? But at the time, that I had this very idealistic idea. Now, that's not to take anything away from the stuff I studied. It was fascinating, but I was fascinated with this idea of like struggle and finding equity out of inequity and finding true, correct order of things and how things should be, and this very youthful kind of ambitious idealism. And so I was just taking all these courses that studied that and studied historical occurrences of that, and wound up taking a whole lot of African American studies courses.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So was that before you got to VCU? Was that Were you on that track mentally already? Was that interesting to you, or did not until you got there?
I don't think I ever was even
Wasn't on your radar?
really exposed to that as a thought paradigm. In James City County, Virginia, in the 1980s. I just wanted to like learn Testament songs and drink beer,
Yeah.
ride around town drinking beer.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah, totally. I get it.
But yeah, so I got to college, and that's the kind of stuff I got into, and I think that carried over into I played in punk bands and kind of like noisy, kind of Fugazi-ish, Jesus Lizard-ish kind of bands, which was pretty happening that era. There was a real cool scene of odd metal influenced sort of hardcore thing going on here in Richmond.
Yeah.
That was really, really vital for me in my kind of creative development. And all that was happening simultaneously while I was going through school. Went to grad school for a little while in Chicago. That was the closest I ever came to really like trying to direct some sort of musical situation. I was like, well, I'm good at school. I don't want to stop doing school now that I've graduated. So maybe I'll go to grad school, but I'll go to grad school in Chicago where there just so happens to be this really cool music scene happening. And if I'm hanging around, maybe I'll get sucked up into the vortex of it. Did not happen. Meanwhile, this little project I've been kind of loosely jamming with back here before I left was starting to get legs under it, and that was Burn the Priest.
So you came back. You left the master's program to come home for that.
Yes, I left the master's program a little while before I left Chicago, but I was doing, again, I was good at school. We talk about addiction and alcoholism. So by that point, I had drank heavily all through college, and by grad school, I was drinking even more heavily and starting to get some what I didn't recognize at the time as consequences, but they were consequences. Falling down flights of stairs and drunk at a show, and then like waking up all banged up the next and think, "Well, shit, I got you too drunk." It's like, yeah, you sure did. And I remember thinking, well, I want a job where I can be an alcoholic, and it's like acceptable. I don't think I called it alcoholic, but I remember thinking I want a job where I can drink every night and it's like acceptable. And I was like, well, college professors, that certainly applies, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to be a government professor. I was doing well in school, but I really didn't. I had good grades, but I wasn't really that like plugged into it. I was kind of disconnected from it, and I felt like if you're in grad school racking up student loans, you should at least be passionate about what you're doing, and I wasn't. What I was passionate about was coming back to the apartment and playing guitar, so I quit.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of talk about that and what you did study before heading into the next part of this. I think we haven't really talked about this, but I think you'll understand kind of the dichotomy or the way I grew up with. It was almost like multiple personalities. There was this one side of me that I was, by the way, speaking of the addiction aspect of this, all the way through my high school years, there was no real brain activity going on. I wasn't thinking about anybody else or group of people or anything. Nothing socially was on my radar other than getting loaded and not dying. And then, I hit a bottom at 17 years old and ended up, had a small overdose and ended up in a hospital and then in treatment, and it stuck for whatever reason.
It's incredible.
But, so my life really, truly didn't start until after, getting sober. And I grew up in a very musical family. My grandmother taught piano for over 50 years and played organ in the church, and it was always a part of, it was always around. And got my first guitar when I was 8 years old. But when I got sober, that whole world, I dove just completely back into music. But the kind of the conversation I want to have is about, I grew up in the Deep South, and all of the Southern rock that was going on and the blues that, like, I saw Stevie Ray Vaughan when I was a teenager, and I Skinnerd and Allman Brothers and all this stuff. But I was at the same exact time, I could sing every word to every Dead Kennedys album and was completely obsessed. I was a hardcore kid in Northwest Louisiana, and there are no hardcore kids in Northwest Louisiana. I was so into the entire East Coast, New York and DC hardcore scene, and how those two like have an equal passion for both, and how those meld together. And then as I've grown older and grown up, because most of my growing up honestly took place in my 30s and 40s, and then, I'll be 52 in a couple months. And just how those worlds, how those things coexist, and how now, specifically with the Southern rock stuff, I wore a belt buckle for 10 years, American by birth, Southern by the grace of God, and I started my career, in New Orleans as a tech working for Crowbar, and then was lucky enough to be there and do the first Down record in the studio and do the first Down tour. And I listened to Second Helping and Nothing Fancy every day, and those songs are heavier than any Meshuggah song, some of that stuff, those riffs and that stuff. But at the same time, a year later, I'm in New York going to work for Life of Agony, and Joey Z's little brother Zamp, that I stayed with when I was up there, turned me on to Wu-Tang Clan. And I'd listen to rap, Louisiana has this massive rap culture, always has, still does. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later. My daughters are just as passionate about that as I was about hardcore as a kid, which is awesome. But I heard KRS-One's Higher Level when I went to New York in '93 to work for Life of Agony. And it blew my mind, But I'm still jamming Leonard Skinner and have Simple Man tattooed across my stomach. You know what I mean? So, I know how much, even Lamb's music, it's all over your riffs. That influence is there.
It's in the DNA of what we're doing, because it's literally in our DNA, right? And while Burn the Priest and Early Lamb of God was going on, I was playing around town in what really, I don't think back then, I guess they didn't call it really Americana, they called it alt country, but I was playing in another band that was totally like that. I was playing slide guitar. I'm not a good banjo player, but I was plucking out banjo chords and playing, and we were we were pretty good. We would open for Drive By Truckers, and we'd open for Hank 3 back when he was doing the Hank Williams sets and all that, and we traveled New York to Atlanta kind of doing shows and stuff. So I had this whole other thing going on that was very Southern, very kind of country influenced. We recorded a demo with Brian Paulson, who did Sunvolt's Trace record. So I had this. There was this time frame that was actually really exciting in its own right, where I had this metal thing that was starting to kind of feel like it was good and it was happening, and then I had this other band that I was playing in that was doing this kind of country Americana thing, and I didn't know which one, where I wanted to go with it. So that sort of speaks to the juxtaposition you're talking about of those two things that are so integral to us musically, but seem so far apart.
Yeah.
But they're not really that far apart, because it's all really about what music feels like it resonates with you on a kind of soul sort of level. And sometimes those worlds even overlap with something you're talking about Down or something like that.
Yeah.
And it did with us too. I mean, early in those Burn the Priest days and even early Lamb of God. So we started kind of breaking and making the most noise up north in Massachusetts, New York, Philly. So I think we collectively always felt like sort of the dirty, kind of grimy, like Southern cousins of that whole scene. So we
Yeah.
would show up there, and I mean, we'd ham it up a little bit. You know, we knew we were the rednecks in the room, and we were kind of like leaning into that. You know, because there is that silly like
Yeah.
Southern pride thing going on. You know, and I think we had it. You know,
Yeah.
for
Well,
whatever that's worth. I mean, people misconstrue that, and you know, you and I have talked about how people can kind of misinterpret that. But it's a thing.
yeah. Well, I've gone through the whole journey with it. Like I fiercely, like I said, I wore the belt buckle and I teched for Pepper on the first ever down tour in '95.
Pepper's got it.
Yeah, Pepper's got, he's got a double dose.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like I brought, it's hanging in my shop in my garage right now. I brought a Louisiana flag I had, and straight up, I mean, there was a friend here in town who gave me a rebel flag that he had had in his shop forever, and we had those on the cabinets. And honest to God, just this is me talking about the change in me and how much I've grown since then. And part of this is the bubble I grew up in. That didn't mean anything bad to me.
Mm-mm.
And which is insane to say now, and uncomfortable to say, but it didn't.
I used to rock with that too, and I did,
Yeah.
and I did it publicly, and didn't think at the time that it meant or should mean anything to do. You know, you're talking about, not that this disqualifies me from the potential of being racist. That would be the most absurdly thing to say, but we're talking about, I was taking all these like courses from these like former Black Panthers and this whole like, Black Power movement teachers in university, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
got a Confederate flag bandana on my
Southern
head
rock
and a
band.
shirt that says I love the South, and I'm it's just like, what's going on? Like, what does that mean? And it's I don't again, I don't rock the stars and bars anymore.
Not for a long time.
And I'm glad, not for a long time, and I'm glad I don't, and I shouldn't have then, but it just it seemed to mean something different then, to me at least, and I had to mature and grow out of that and understand that it's not about necessarily what I think it means. It's about how someone else feels when they see it, and do I want to be the guy that makes someone else feel that when they see that? And I don't, so it's pretty easy for me to put that away and never bring it out again.
Yeah. Same. Exact same. Like
I've said before, if I still have, when I say Southern pride, and people are like, Virginia's not the South. Well, it's maybe geographically it's not, but culturally it is. Take a ride with me and I'll show you. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
if you want Southern pride, if you want, go wash your truck and then drive down a country road blasting the Allman Brothers with the windows down, or hold the door for somebody and say thank you, and call somebody ma'am, and eat some peach cobbler and shut up.
I mean, for me, I've kind of gone full circle with it to where I got so embarrassed by I don't know anything else to call it other than ignorance of like having a sticker on on a guitar case when I was 20 years old, a Rebel flag sticker. My intention, I've talked about this with other things, with other like women's issues and other things. My intentionality couldn't be more irrelevant. It's exactly like you said. This is something that evokes emotion and hurt and pain, and so without going any further into that, like I eradicated all of that years ago, but then and went almost to level and even it out. It's just in recent years that I've been like, I can differentiate having pride in where I'm from, because there is so much, especially I know you were in Louisiana for a while. This is such a unique culture here, and so much history and multicultural heritage here that is to be celebrated. And just food and music is the South. There is a different I say this, of course, this is my only reference. It's where I've grown up, but there's a different passion about it here. You know, that absolutely, when you talk about being of a place, being of the ground here, you know, that's the pride I feel in it. And not,
Well, it's a unique corner down there. Louisiana's got its own whole thing. That's just it's different, and it's awesome, man. I've had great times there, and love the culture there, and it's a lot to be proud of. And it doesn't that doesn't have to be confrontational at all.
exactly. And I grew up between here and West Virginia, so I'm a hillbilly by birth, and I've got the whole bluegrass thing from there.
That's
and
a whole nother thing.
Yeah, and got down here with the blues and Zydeco and all the New Orleans, backbeat stuff. And
So cool. And I mean, as a native, born and raised Virginian, I have a obligation by birth to make fun of West Virginia, but I absolutely love West Virginia.
Yeah.
I noticed you wore the shirt for me.
it was a total coincidence.
No, it wasn't.
I mentioned about my girls earlier. My daughters are about to turn 25 and 20 in the next couple months, and I think it's unique to here. I don't know that I've seen it many other places, but like for a perfect example, like 2 years ago at Mardi Gras time, this video went viral, at least down here. It ended up with millions of views, and a float's going by, and it was not even in it was, I think, in Monroe, which is a small town in northeast Louisiana. But at their Mardi Gras celebration, this float is playing, I think it was Boosie, Wipe Me Down. He's this rapper from Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm. I'm aware.
And it's, oh yeah. So, and there is this straight up the whitest dude ever with his beads on and his, stack of cups. As the camera goes by on the float, every single word. I mean, this dude looks like he was likely at January 6th. And he stormed the Capitol, and he's singing every word to a Boosie song. And that's just, but when I say that, like, Louise, like my daughters, my younger one goes to LSU, and you want to talk about heavy? Like I saw the Sabbath reunion in, 96 in Milton Keynes, England. 60,000 people. I sat with Tony's Tech and sat with Bill Ward and his wife, because Bill had a minor heart attack a few weeks before.
Excuse me. Damn. Start that story again.
Okay. So, like, I saw Black Sabbath, 96, the reunion at Milton Keynes, England. It was the one-day Ozfest. I told Clint this story on his episode, and I got really lucky, got to sit with Tony's Tech and watch the whole set with Bill Ward and his wife, because Bill had a heart attack and Vinny Appice came to play that show. It was a minor heart attack, but he couldn't play the show.
Right.
So I literally got to talk recovery with Bill Ward before they went on, when he came out and sat down in a chair right in front of me. And I see this show, and it's fucking Sabbath in England. I get chill bumps just thinking about it. And I can list, both hands, other experiences like that, where musically these shows, these performances that I was completely present for, that were, like, in that case, the heaviest thing I could ever imagine. And then I've been going to LSU games all my life, Death Valley, Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge, 103,000 people. And I'm sitting in the student section with my daughter on family weekend, year before last, and they play Lil Boosie Set It Off during a commercial break. Dude, it was bigger. It was like seeing Sabbath. It was
erupted,
like the heaviest shit ever,
Yeah.
So the fact that my girls will randomly send me videos, like Gracie, my younger one, just last month, Boosie did a last minute show at one of the bars in Tigerland, where all the kids go to hang out and drink.
Wow, really?
And she was like fifth row and sends me videos of her every single word, And just to see my kids have that passion for that. But like, that's part of being from here, that is uniquely, anyway, sorry. Super tangent.
No, but that's I understand that. I've seen it. I'm familiar with it. That is a Louisiana thing, and
Yeah.
that's what makes where we're from.
Matter.
Yeah, matter. That's it. Yeah, stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Well, since I mentioned that, like that Sabbath story, and I've got others, but what
You
was
know what
there?
stuck out to me about that Sabbath story, that part of that story, was that last minute Bill Ward can't do the reunion show because of a health issue, and he still goes to watch it
Not only went to
because
watch it,
not everyone, and sort of firsthand front row seat how a lot of bands work, especially when they're big bands and they've been around for a long time. There are a lot of drummers or a lot of band. No, I'm not gonna pick on drummers. It's easy, but I'm not gonna. But there are a lot of band members that wouldn't go to that. They'd be if they couldn't play
yeah.
and they had to sit on the sidelines, then they're just not gonna go. But that speaks to that dude.
Well, like not only was he there, it was like he was the biggest fan that was there,
Yeah, yeah.
and they called him out. And I have this picture, and I will send it to you. And when I make the post for this episode, I'll include it in the photos. But because I had my little whatever Kodak Instamatic camera, this was in '96. I didn't have any digital shit. I happened to get a picture of it. They called him out to say he's not dead. He's actually here because word had gotten out he'd had a heart attack. And when he went out and was standing with his arms up in the air, like waving at the crowd, Ozzy pantsed him. Pulled his pants to his ankles, and he didn't have any underwear on. And he just stood there with his arms up, and I have a picture from behind that I took of that, which is, awesome. Do you have, and is there a show that you've seen, like, any one stick out that, like, was just a absolute chill bumps and overwhelm and almost emotional? I get emotional at a lot of shows, man.
Yeah. I don't know that there's one. I did that Ozfest tour in 2004, summer of 2004, and it was all original members of Sabbath.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of tours. I do a lot of tours with bands that I have been a fan of for most of my life, and Black Sabbath is definitely one of them. But that I do all these tours, and my point is I don't often go watch a band every night. That tour, man, I would watch Sabbath every single night. Maybe not top to bottom whole show, but I would go watch at least 3 or 4 songs every single night because I understood the gravity of what I was seeing. I mean, these dudes invented heavy metal.
Yeah.
And I get to watch that go down like all the time, every single night, not 3 or 4 nights a week or whatever it was. So that was a special tour. I don't know that one show on that tour that stood out was there was one night that Ozzy got sick. It was in I think it was in Camden, which was right outside of
Jersey.
Philly, yeah, across the river in Jersey, and Judas Priest was on that tour as well. So Halford came out and did the whole Black Sabbath set. So it was Black Sabbath with Halford singing.
Wow.
Unless that happened again some other time, I think that they did an abbreviated set, but they did a set, and he sang for Sabbath, and that was cool. I think I watched that whole set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right, we could sit here and talk about those type of things all day, but I want to move on. And you touched on it a little bit, but as far as your drinking and use, when you said it started teenage, but do you know when the line got crossed, if you will, or when it?
I don't know. And you hear a lot when if you run in circles with people that are in recovery, which I do quite a bit. You hear sometimes people share that, as soon as I took my first drink, an alcoholic was born, or it changed my life, or I instantly knew that this is what I needed to feel normal. I didn't have that experience. The first time I drank, I drank enough where I should have been inebriated, but I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel different. I just liked feeling like I was doing something like that made me a part of the group that was, drinking.
Yeah.
It wasn't the physical reaction that I had hoped for. Same thing happened the first couple times I smoked pot or whatever. It was just like I was trying to act like I thought I was supposed to be acting if I felt like I thought I was supposed to feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Gotcha.
So even in drinking and using, I was trying to do it right, which is a very alcoholic thing to do.
Of course.
But then I kind of got the hang of it, and it did start working. It started working really well. And the thing is that drinking and doing what are considered lower tier drugs worked for me for a very, very, very long time. I would say a solid 20 years. Now it was progressing. Yeah. As I look back, I can see it. But I was a very, very functional alcoholic and, drug user, not really addict at that point. Like not physically addicted to drugs, not doing drugs every day, just kind of tinkering a little bit, partying, if you will, and drinking alcoholically. So it worked for a long time. It worked. I was very functional. And that's a scary thing because what I wound up believing was that was part of my creative process. And in a sense it was. So the lie was, and the lie that I believed for a very long time, even after I got clean, was that I kind of need that stuff to do what I do. Yeah. And if I do what I do without that stuff, it's not going to be near as good. And that kept me using for quite a while.
Yeah. And I've heard that, I'm kind of in a unique position that, I started touring as a tech in 93 and did my last, full tour in 07. So, I had the opportunity, and I was sober before I ever went on the road. So I had the opportunity to be around quite a few guys over the years who I saw them in active addiction and then saw them get clean. And almost every one of them has said the exact same thing. Like, I didn't think I could do this sober. Like, they thought they were going to give up their inspiration or that feeling, whatever generated this,
yeah,
coming out of them.
So I don't think it's not without a learning curve, I will say. I think that I will say that the creativity that I found when I was drinking and using.
You got some good ass songs out of it.
I got some really quality stuff out of that, right? So I'd like to sit here and say, well, I did that in spite of the drugs or the alcohol, not because of. I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. I mean, I think there is. When it's working for you, I think drugs and alcohol lower your inhibitions and they make you a little more available to something that is wacky and may not. So you have to learn to do that without it. That's not an endorsement for using. It's just was my experience. But what's also been my experience is that since I've gotten clean, I have become more creative and more prolific just as a songwriter, a touring musician. I wrote a book. I co-produced a record for another band. I've written a bunch of songs, for other bands and outside of my genre. I've just done a lot of stuff that there's no way I would have done without getting clean. No, absolutely no question and no way. So I think for me, I just had to learn to do it a different way. And once I believed that I could do it a different way, then the doors just kind of flew open, and I got some legs under me creatively. It's funny, man. I have this thing, and it doesn't mean I don't want to talk about it anymore because that's absolutely not the case. But I always have this thing like I'm still scared sometimes to talk about being in recovery because I don't want I don't want to lose it, man.
Don't want to fuck it up.
I don't want to lose it. Like I don't want it to fuck up.
Yeah.
So I'm almost scared, you know, if I name it or identify as that, then I'm doomed, you know. But you know, I
Which
also
is
I also believe that I've been granted by the universe a certain platform, and I do believe that I have a bit of an obligation to let someone know that's out there and may still be struggling with addiction that it's possible. It really is possible to stop.
well, to go back into the at least the last few years of your active use. What was it like touring with a sober bandmate and still being in it?
Well, I
How did it change when Randy, when Randy
well
cleaned up?
first and foremost, I felt betrayed because Randy and I were kind of running partners. So, you know, we crept around together,
Yeah.
and if things got a little scarce, we sort of hid from each other. But if things were bountiful, we were running partners, you know. And when he got clean, um, I felt betrayed. I felt like he'd abandoned me a little bit, and I think I also was like, he ain't gonna stay clean, you know. I didn't want to believe that he could do it. I wasn't like trying to sabotage him, but I just, you know, in my sort of twisted up mind, I was like, he can't do this, he can't do it. And but what wound up happening was that over the course of a number of years, I watched Randy going from a guy that was kind of an angry drunk, um, and that talked a lot about stuff he was going to do and what he was capable of, and was really, you know, and I would say this with him standing right next to me. I'm not talking trash on him. He would tell you a lot about what he could and would do, but never really do much of it. And over the course of the first 3 or 4 years of him getting sober, he started doing a lot of that stuff and doing it really, really well. And I took notice of that. And it wasn't an overnight thing. I didn't one day just jot down all the stuff that Randy was doing that I thought was impressive. It was just over time I was paying attention because we were friends all along. Like Randy and I were close friends. And I realized that his life was so full of all these awesome experiences and events, and he was doing all this stuff, and he wasn't drinking or doing drugs, which didn't make any sense to me at all. Like, I mean, of course, I can understand intellectually that someone might not drink or do drugs, but just for Randy to not do that and to actually be happy and to actually be doing all these awesome things and taking all these incredible pictures and having, like, you know, art galleries post his stuff and writing a book and surfing in all these exotic places and just really, really doing cool things. You know, it had an impact on me. I'm like, golly, maybe it works.
Yeah.
Maybe it works. Maybe your life can change if you put this shit down.
That's so awesome.
Randy isn't the reason I got sober, you know, but he didn't hurt. It didn't hurt to have someone, you know, an arm's length away that it was working for.
You at least knew that there was another way.
He modeled a version of success for me that looked attractive.
Attraction, not promotion.
Heard that before.
What was if you want to talk about it, what was your bottom? How'd you find bottom?
My bottom was it was a spiritual bottom. I didn't wake up in jail. I didn't wake up in a hospital with tubes, you know, coming out of me. I didn't crash a car into a tree. I didn't fortunately have any of those things happen. I had been to outpatient programs, inpatient programs, seen therapists, gone to the drug replacement programs, done all the stuff. Tried only doing this when I'm doing this, only drinking, because somehow I did play that game where I convinced myself that drinking isn't as bad, all that kind of stuff. And then wind up drinking whiskey as soon as you open your eyes, and you're just like, wait, how's this not as bad? So I was on tour and I was on a run, but I was in Europe, so I couldn't get the drugs that I really wanted because the drugs that I liked were harder to get over there, and the stuff that was easy to get over there I hated, but I was doing it anyway. And I was one morning. It was in the morning. It wasn't even noon yet. I just checked into a hotel room for a day off, and I drank all the beer out of the mini bar, and there was no more. And so I was gonna have to go and I was just like looking out the window. I was like, God damn, this is. And it wasn't. None of them was doing anything. I had spent the day before like, I got a bunch of these pills and this powder and this bottle of this and all this stuff, and it wasn't working. Nothing was working. I mean, I couldn't even. It was really aggravating. It was like enraging me that I couldn't even get the feeling of anything. It was just like nothing's working.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of days of that, and I woke up one morning in Newcastle, and I was just that ice pick through your head kind of hangover, and like your mouth feels like a shag rug that someone dumped an ashtray out on, and everything hurts, and your stomach's going blah, 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 and just all that, And it occurred to me that like I felt this way, and it wasn't because I did some night out on the town in London raging or something the night before. It wasn't because I saw some old friends and we went to. Nothing happened the night before. It was nothing. It was like a bus ride. It was like nothing happened. Nothing notable or remarkable at all the night before, and yet I'm still this hungover. And miserable. And if I thought about all the stuff I'd put into my body that week and how nothing had worked or nothing had made me been like, cool, I got a good one, And I didn't drink that day. And that's not the day I got clean, because I had a few other things I had to stop doing, besides alcohol, that I would have gotten more physically ill from stopping. So I didn't get clean that day, but I didn't drink that day. And that started the process. And that was the last. I haven't had a drink since that day. And that was in November of 2018. And a few weeks later, I was able to come off of the other drug situation in a way that I was able to kick that without being on tour, and I've been clean ever since. So the bottom was that misery of I am miserable with or without this stuff.
Yeah.
And no amount of this, that, or the other thing makes me less miserable because it doesn't work anymore. So I'm just as miserable with it, more miserable with it as I am without it, I think. But I haven't been without it in so long, I'm not even sure. So I know exactly what's going to happen if I keep doing this, because I know every single thing just about there is to know about this. But I haven't been sober since before I could drive a car, Yeah. So, I didn't get sober excited about it. I didn't do cartwheels the next weekend when the sun came out. I was extremely angry and very prickly and snappy and kind of skittish and scared for about a year and a half.
You weren't looking to make any new friends.
You remember that really well, yeah. I wasn't. I told you that earlier. I think I told you about me telling someone else that, and
yeah.
I started hanging around some people that were doing had been doing what I was just starting to do, which was stay clean and not use, not drink, and hang around people that were doing that. And I definitely, that was my mantra. I was like, I ain't here to make no friends, man.
Yeah, it was right along in there when I met you and was like, hey, this dude's like an old friend immediately.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny how that works.
Yeah, we're still here, man.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, it's Brent. Hope you're enjoying the conversation with Mark so far. This is where we decided to chop it in half. So to hear the second half of this conversation, please come back either next week. It might be 2 weeks. I think I'm going to go with every 2 weeks right now. So come back then and be watching for it, and hope to see you then. Please like, subscribe, follow on Instagram, all that stuff. Thanks for listening.